The emergency alarms echoed through the massive halls of the Galactic Council Station. Ambassador Kethvar rushed through the corridors as fast as his crystalline legs could carry him. His homeworld was gone. 3 billion of his people had died in just 4 days when the Zephyrian swarms descended from the void. The insectoid invaders had torn through every defense his people had built over centuries. The council chamber buzzed with panic when Kethvar arrived. Representatives from dozens of species filled the curved seats that surrounded the central platform. Their voices mixed into a chaos of fear and anger. The Veltar delegate Grexmore slammed his massive reptilian fist on his desk, making the whole section shake. His fleet had tried to stop the Zephyrians at the nebular gates. Half his ships were now floating debris. "Order, please maintain order," Chairman Zorthak called from the center platform. The ancient being's voice carried the weight of thousands of years. His species had guided galactic peace since before most others had learned to build spacecraft. Now that peace was crumbling faster than anyone had thought possible. The holographic display above the platform showed the current state of the war. Red zones marked Zephyrian-controlled space. The red was spreading like a disease across the galaxy. 17 worlds had fallen in the past month. Military analysts estimated another 40 would be lost within weeks if nothing changed. The Altarian Republic formally requests immediate military intervention, Kethvar announced. His voice synthesizer struggled to maintain steady tones. "My people cannot wait for diplomatic solutions. The Zephyrians do not negotiate. They consume." Grexmore stood up from his seat. "The Veltar Confederacy supports this request. We have lost 300 warships trying to contain these monsters. Our conventional tactics are useless against their swarm formations. They fight like nothing we have ever encountered." Other voices joined the discussion. The Andromedans had lost 2 colony worlds. The Silicon Collective reported that entire mining stations had vanished without sending distress signals. Every species that had fought the Zephyrians told the same story. The enemy appeared in overwhelming numbers, coordinated perfectly, and showed no mercy to civilian populations. "What do our military advisors recommend?" Chairman Zorthak asked. General Vextara, the Council's chief military strategist, activated another holographic display. Battle footage showed Zephyrian bioships swarming through space like angry insects. Their weapons seemed to be grown rather than built. Acidic projectiles melted through armor plating. Boarding pods that looked like massive beetles cut through hull metal with organic cutting tools. "Every engagement follows the same pattern," the general explained. "The Zephyrians attack in perfect coordination. Their bioships share a collective consciousness that allows instant communication across entire fleets. When we destroy their command vessels, others immediately take over. When we break their formations, they reform within minutes. They learn from each battle and adapt their tactics faster than we can develop countermeasures." The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The Galactic Council had maintained peace for over 2,000 years through superior technology and diplomatic skill. They had never faced an enemy that could match their weapons and ignore their negotiations. "There must be something we can do," pleaded Ambassador Neldari of the Centauri Alliance. "Some weapon we have not tried, some tactic we have overlooked." Chairman Zorthak's expression grew troubled. "There is one possibility, but it goes against everything our civilization stands for." He paused and looked around the chamber. "We could request assistance from the humans." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Half the delegates began speaking at once. The Pristine Collective's representative stood up in horror. "The humans are barely civilized barbarians. They have been council members for only 50 years. Their military history is nothing but endless wars against their own species." "Exactly why we should consider them," Grexmore growled. "They understand warfare in ways we do not. Their conflicts make our current situation look like a minor border dispute." Chairman Zorthak activated a new display. Video footage from Earth's history filled the chamber. Ancient humans throwing spears at massive beasts. Medieval armies clashing with swords and shields. Modern soldiers fighting in jungles and deserts and cities. Aircraft dropping explosives on enemy positions. Nuclear weapons creating artificial suns that destroyed entire cities. "This is what they do to each other," the chairman said quietly. "Imagine what they might do to an external threat." The footage continued. Humans fighting in space around their gas giant planets, mining wars in asteroid belts, colonial rebellions on distant moons. Every conflict showed the same pattern. Humans never gave up. When they were outnumbered, they used tricks and traps. When their weapons were inferior, they found ways to turn enemy strength against itself. When facing impossible odds, they became more dangerous rather than less. Ambassador Kethvar studied the images with growing hope. They fight like they have nothing to lose. Because they often do not, General Vextara added. Human military doctrine accepts casualties that would be unthinkable to our species. They view individual sacrifice for group survival as honorable rather than tragic. Their soldiers volunteer for missions with near-zero survival probability. The debate continued for hours. Some delegates argued that humans were too unpredictable to trust with galactic security. Others worried that human methods might be worse than Zephyrian conquest. A few suggested that humanity's violent nature made them natural allies for the insectoid invaders. "We must vote," Chairman Zorthak finally announced. "All in favor of formally requesting human military assistance." The count was close. 37 species voted in favor. 29 opposed. 8 abstained. The motion carried by the narrowest possible margin. "The message will be sent immediately to Admiral Jake Morrison, commander of the Terran Defense Fleet," the chairman declared. "May the ancients forgive us for what we are about to unleash." As the council session ended, Ambassador Kethvar remained in his seat. He thought about his destroyed homeworld and the billions of his people who would never see another sunrise. The humans might be dangerous, but the Zephyrians were certain death. Sometimes civilization had to make deals with devils to survive. The message pod launched from the council station moments later. It would reach Earth's solar system in 3 days. By then, 17 more worlds might fall to the swarms. The galaxy held its breath and waited to see what monsters they had just invited to their war. Admiral Jake Morrison sat in his command chair aboard Luna Base, reading morning reports from the patrol fleets. The 60-year-old officer had gray hair and scars from 3 different wars. His weathered face showed no emotion as he reviewed routine supply requests and maintenance schedules. The Terran Defense Fleet was keeping busy with border patrols and pirate hunting, but nothing that required his personal attention. The communication alert chimed softly. Morrison looked up from his tablet as Lieutenant Commander Lisa Park approached his desk. The young Korean-American officer carried herself with the precise movements of someone trained in both space combat and diplomatic protocol. She had graduated top of her class from the Defense Academy and served as Morrison's chief strategic advisor for the past 2 years. "Sir, we have received a priority message from the Galactic Council," Park announced. Her voice carried a note of excitement that she was trying to suppress. "It appears to be a formal request for military assistance." Morrison raised an eyebrow. The Council had never asked humans for military help before. Most alien species considered Earth's armed forces to be crude and barbaric. They tolerated human membership in the galactic community, but rarely sought human involvement in serious matters. "Put it on the main screen," Morrison ordered. The holographic display activated, showing Chairman Zorthak's ancient features. The alien's voice carried undertones of desperation as he explained the Zephyrian threat. Morrison listened without interruption as the chairman described the falling worlds, the failed military responses, and the growing panic among council species. "They want us to fight their war for them," Park observed after the message ended. "They want us to save their civilization," Morrison corrected. He stood up and walked to the observation window that looked out at Earth's blue marble hanging in space. "The question is whether we can do it." Park activated her personal tablet and began pulling up files. "I took the liberty of analyzing their enemy profiles while you were listening to the message. The Zephyrians fight with perfect coordination but follow predictable patterns. They have never faced guerrilla tactics or asymmetric warfare." Morrison turned back to study the tactical data. The alien bioships moved in formation like schools of fish. Their weapons were organic but powerful. Their numbers seemed endless. Any conventional military force would be overwhelmed by sheer mass of firepower. "What do you recommend?" Morrison asked. "We fight dirty," Park replied without hesitation. "These bugs have evolved to handle organized resistance. They expect their enemies to form battle lines and trade shots until one side breaks. They have never dealt with opponents who refuse to play by accepted rules." Morrison smiled for the first time that morning. Park was thinking like a proper human warrior. "Send word to our best unconventional commanders. I want volunteers for a high-risk deep space mission." Within hours, Morrison's staff had assembled in the main briefing room. Captain Ryan O'Brien arrived first, still wearing his submarine service insignia despite years of space duty. The Irish-American officer had earned his reputation hunting pirates in the asteroid belts. His ships could disappear from sensors and strike without warning. Major Carmen Rodriguez entered next, her Special Forces uniform bearing marks from a dozen different conflicts. The former Marine had led raids on everything from terrorist bases to corporate installations. She specialized in missions that regular military units could not or would not attempt. Dr. Kevin Chang came last, carrying a briefcase full of classified weapons designs. The physicist had left his university position to work on military applications of exotic technology. His inventions pushed the boundaries of what galactic treaties considered acceptable warfare. "The situation is simple," Morrison began. "An enemy that nobody can beat using conventional tactics. They want us to try unconventional ones." He activated the tactical display showing Zephyrian fleet compositions and attack patterns. O'Brien studied the formation diagrams with professional interest. "They fly like a school of fish. Tight formations, coordinated movements, shared information. Break up their coordination and they will be vulnerable." "How do we break coordination in a hive mind species?" Rodriguez asked. Chang opened his briefcase and pulled out several devices that looked more like toys than weapons. "Psychological warfare. The bugs share all sensory input across their collective consciousness. That means anything that disrupts one ship affects the entire fleet." Morrison nodded approvingly. "What kind of disruption are we talking about?" "Audio chaos generators that broadcast random noise across all frequencies. Visual strobe weapons that overload optical sensors. Chemical agents designed to trigger panic responses in insectoid nervous systems." Chang smiled as he spoke. "The galactic weapons treaties forbid most of these devices. They consider them inhumane." "Good thing we are not fighting humans," O'Brien commented. Rodriguez was already thinking about boarding actions. "Their bioships are grown rather than built. That means they have organic vulnerabilities. Fire will spread through living tissue faster than metal. Biological weapons will be more effective than explosives." Morrison felt the familiar excitement that came before a challenging mission. These officers understood what the Galactic Council did not. War was not about honor or following rules. War was about winning by any means necessary. The aliens had asked for human help because they were desperate. They had no idea what they were about to unleash. "I want a full strike force ready within 72 hours, Morrison announced. 30 ships, hand-picked crews, experimental weapons. We are going to show these bugs why humans have never lost a war." The next 3 days passed in controlled chaos, as Morrison's team prepared for departure. Supply ships arrived carrying weapons that had never been tested in combat. Volunteer crews underwent crash courses in alien biology and psychology. Intelligence officers studied every available piece of information about Zephyrian tactics and technology. Dr. Chang worked around the clock installing his devices on the fleet's ships. Audio weapons designed to broadcast Earth's most aggressive music at brain-damaging volumes. Visual systems that could project nightmare images directly into alien optical centers. Chemical sprayers loaded with compounds that would trigger every fear response known to insectoid biology. Captain O'Brien's stealth corvettes received special modifications. Their hulls were coated with materials that absorbed sensor waves. Their engines were muffled to reduce thermal signatures. They could approach enemy formations completely undetected until they opened fire. Major Rodriguez's marine transports looked like ordinary cargo vessels from the outside. Inside, they carried assault teams trained in close combat with non-human opponents. Their weapons were designed to function in alien atmospheres, and their armor could protect against biological attacks. The Terran strike force that departed Earth's solar system was small compared to the massive fleets that other species had sent against the Zephyrians. 37 ships seemed insignificant next to the thousands of vessels that had already failed. But each human ship carried something that no galactic military had ever deployed against an external enemy: the willingness to do whatever it took to win. The Kepler defense line stretched across space like a broken necklace. Ships from dozens of species formed desperate battle formations as they prepared for what many believed would be their final stand. The combined fleet numbered over 3,000 vessels, representing the largest military force the galaxy had assembled in 2 centuries. Despite their numbers, every commander knew they were about to die. Admiral Krendar of the Altarian Navy watched his tactical displays with growing dread. The Zephyrian swarms were massing just beyond sensor range, preparing for their final assault. Intelligence reports suggested the enemy had brought over 10,000 bioships for this attack. No defensive position had ever survived such overwhelming numbers. Contact from the human Fleet, reported his communications officer. Kren. Dar turned to see a small formation of ships approaching the defense line, 37 vessels that looked insignificant compared to the massive alien dreadnoughts around them. The human ships were smaller, simpler, and carried weapons that galactic military experts considered outdated. Many of the Allied commanders had openly questioned why the humans had even bothered to come. The communication channel opened to show Admiral Morrison's weathered face. The human looked calm despite the impossible odds they were about to face. "This is Admiral Morrison requesting permission to take position in the defense line." "Permission granted," Krendar replied. "Admiral, your ships are welcome, but I must warn you that our situation is hopeless. The enemy will attack within the hour with forces that outnumber us 3-1. Morrison's expression did not change. "Understood. My ships will take position on the outer perimeter." The channel closed before Krendar could respond. He watched in confusion as the human ships scattered across the battlefield instead of forming proper defensive formations. Some vessels moved toward the flanks where they would be easily surrounded. Others positioned themselves behind asteroid clusters where they would have limited fields of fire. The humans were deploying their forces in ways that violated every principle of space combat. "Perhaps they do not understand proper military tactics," suggested his tactical officer. Before Krendar could respond, the Zephyrian attack began. Dimensional rifts tore open across the battlefield as bioships poured through like angry insects. The enemy formations were perfect, with larger vessels protecting smaller ones while swarm fighters provided escort. Their coordination was flawless as they adjusted their approach to target the strongest defensive positions first. The Allied fleet opened fire according to established battle doctrine. Energy weapons lit up space as thousands of ships engaged the enemy swarms. The Zephyrians absorbed the initial barrage with minimal losses, their organic armor proving resistant to conventional weapons. They continued their advance with the mechanical precision that had broken every defense the galaxy could mount. Admiral Morrison watched the opening exchanges from his command chair aboard the UES Defiance. His tactical officer, Commander Park, stood beside him, analyzing enemy movements with professional interest. The Zephyrians were doing exactly what human intelligence had predicted. Perfect coordination, predictable patterns, overwhelming force applied in the most efficient manner possible. 17 minutes, Morrison announced to his bridge crew. "That is how long it took them to break the Altarian homeworld defense. Let us see how they handle something different." Morrison activated the fleet communication channel. "All ships execute pattern chaos." The human response was unlike anything the Allied observers had ever witnessed. Instead of maintaining defensive formations, the human ships began moving in seemingly random directions. Some vessels accelerated directly toward the enemy swarms while others retreated toward the outer system. Several ships simply vanished from sensors entirely as their stealth systems activated. Captain O'Brien's Corvette squadron was the first to strike. The small ships had used the initial chaos to position themselves behind the Zephyrian formations. When they opened fire, their weapons were not aimed at enemy hulls. Instead, they targeted the biomechanical communication nodes that allowed the swarms to coordinate their movements. Dr. Chang's experimental weapons proved devastatingly effective. Audio chaos generators began broadcasting across all frequencies, filling the Zephyrian communication channels with sounds that no organic being was designed to process. Heavy metal music mixed with feedback loops and subsonic pulses that triggered panic responses in insectoid nervous systems. The effect on the enemy swarms was immediate and catastrophic. Ships that had moved with perfect coordination began flying erratic patterns as their shared consciousness was disrupted by sensory overload. Formation discipline collapsed as individual vessels tried to escape the psychological assault. For the first time in the war, Zephyrian bioships were firing on each other in their confusion. Major Rodriguez's marine transports joined the attack by doing something that no galactic species had ever attempted. Instead of engaging in ship-to-ship combat, they flew directly into the enemy formations and began launching boarding pods. The Zephyrians had never faced opponents who were willing to board their vessels while under fire. The human boarding parties that cut their way into enemy bioships carried weapons, specifically designed for fighting in organic environments, flame units that could burn through living tissue faster than metal, chemical sprayers that released compounds toxic to insectoid biology. Most importantly, they brought something that no galactic military possessed: the willingness to fight hand-to-hand in enemy territory. Allied commanders watched in shock as human soldiers engaged Zephyrian warriors in close combat throughout the bioships. The insects were individually stronger and better armed, but they had never faced opponents trained in dozens of different fighting styles. Human Marines used everything from ancient martial arts to modern combat techniques, adapting their tactics to exploit weaknesses in enemy anatomy. Admiral Krendar stared at his tactical displays in disbelief. The Zephyrian advance had not just stopped, it was retreating. Entire swarm formations were breaking off from combat and fleeing toward the dimensional rifts. The enemy was withdrawing from a battle they should have won easily. How is this possible? His tactical officer whispered. The answer came from intercepted Zephyrian communications. The collective consciousness that had made them invincible was working against them. Every ship that experienced the human psychological weapons shared that trauma with the entire fleet. Every boarding party that fought through their bioships transmitted images of ruthless human warriors to thousands of other vessels. The hive mind that had been their greatest strength was now spreading panic faster than any weapon. Morrison watched the enemy retreat with professional satisfaction. The humans had not won through superior numbers or better technology. They had won by fighting in ways that the enemy could not understand or counter. The Zephyrians had expected civilized warfare between organized fleets. Instead, they had encountered something that no hive mind could process properly. Chaos wielded with deadly precision by a species that refused to follow anyone else's rules. News of humanity's victory at Kepler spread through the galaxy faster than light-speed communications could carry it. For the first time in the war, an entire Zephyrian swarm fleet had retreated from battle. The impossible had happened, and every species in the Council wanted to understand how the humans had achieved what their combined fleets could not. Admiral Morrison received his reinforcements 3 days after the battle. The ships that arrived from Earth were not the massive dreadnoughts that other species favored. Instead, they brought specialists in areas that galactic civilization had never considered military assets. The human approach to warfare was expanding beyond anything the Council had imagined possible. Dr. Amy Foster stepped off the transport ship carrying cases full of biological research equipment. The xenobiologist had spent the past week studying captured Zephyrian technology and tissue samples. Her findings would have horrified any civilized species, but they represented exactly the kind of advantage that human forces needed. The enemy's greatest strength is also their fatal weakness, Foster explained to Morrison during her briefing. Their hive mind allows perfect coordination, but it also means that anything affecting one ship impacts the entire fleet. I have developed targeted biological agents that can disrupt their neural networks. Morrison studied the vials of engineered pathogens that Foster had created. By galactic law, biological warfare was considered a crime against all sentient life. The weapons treaties that governed interspecies conflicts specifically banned the development of such agents. No civilized military would consider using them under any circumstances. How effective are they? Morrison asked. Field tests on captured specimens show complete neural shutdown within minutes of exposure. The pathogens are designed to spread through their biomechanical systems like a virus through a computer network. One infected ship can contaminate an entire fleet. Captain Danny Wright arrived with the second wave of reinforcements. The former asteroid miner commanded a squadron of converted civilian vessels that looked like ordinary merchant ships from the outside. His crews were volunteers from mining operations, cargo haulers, and salvage teams who had signed up for the most dangerous mission in human military history. "We are ready to begin deep penetration operations," Wright reported. "My ships can pass for refugee vessels fleeing the war zone. The Zephyrians have never shown interest in civilian craft, so they should ignore us until we are already behind their lines." Morrison nodded approvingly. Wright's plan was audacious beyond anything that galactic military doctrine would consider acceptable. His converted merchant ships would penetrate deep into enemy territory, disguised as harmless civilians. Once they reached their targets, they would transform into mobile weapons platforms capable of striking supply depots, breeding worlds, and command centers. The psychological impact of humanity's first victory was already becoming apparent. Intelligence reports showed that Zephyrian fleets were beginning to retreat from contested systems without engaging Allied forces. The collective consciousness that had made them invincible was now working against them. spreading fear and uncertainty throughout their empire. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Barnes documented everything for the historical record. The military historian had been assigned to observe human tactics and report back to Earth Command. His daily reports painted a picture of warfare that violated every principle of civilized combat, while proving devastatingly effective against an implacable enemy. "The humans do not fight wars," Barnes wrote in one report. "They wage campaigns of psychological destruction designed to break enemy morale before physical contact begins. Their weapons are crafted not just to kill but to terrorize. Their tactics are calculated to create maximum fear and confusion among opposing forces." Wright's merchant fleet launched their deep penetration mission within the week. 47 ships that looked like desperate refugees fleeing the war zone crossed into Zephyrian space without triggering any defensive response. The enemy collective consciousness dismissed them as irrelevant to military operations. This proved to be another fatal mistake in their war against humanity. The converted civilian ships carried weapons that no galactic species had ever deployed. Mining charges designed to crack asteroids were repurposed as bunker busters capable of penetrating bioarmor. Cargo handling equipment became kinetic weapons that could punch through enemy hulls. Most importantly, they carried human crews trained to improvise solutions to problems that military manuals had never addressed. Wright's first target was a Zephyrian breeding world deep in enemy territory. The planet produced the bioships that formed the backbone of their military forces. Destroying it would cripple their ability to replace combat losses. More importantly, the psychological impact of losing a core world would spread panic throughout their collective consciousness. The attack began when Wright's ships dropped their disguises and revealed their true nature. Merchant vessels transformed into weapons platforms as hidden gun ports opened and concealed missile tubes extended. The Zephyrians had never seen civilian craft behave in such ways, and their defensive systems were unprepared for threats that violated all accepted patterns of military behavior. Foster's biological weapons proved even more effective in practice than in laboratory testing. The engineered pathogens spread through enemy bioships like wildfire, shutting down neural networks and leaving entire fleets drifting helplessly in space. The Zephyrians had no defense against weapons that attacked their organic technology from within. The breeding world fell within hours of the initial assault. Wright's converted miners used their industrial equipment to crack the planet's biomechanical defense networks, like they were breaking up asteroids for processing. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Zephyrian fleets across 3 sectors began, retreating toward their core systems. As news of the disaster spread through their collective mind, Admiral Morrison received reports of enemy withdrawals from battle zones that humans had never even visited. The mere possibility that human forces might appear anywhere at any time was causing widespread panic among enemy commanders. Swarm queens who had never experienced defeat were questioning the collective consciousness that had guided their species for millennia. The human way of warfare was proving to be more than just unconventional tactics and experimental weapons. It was a fundamental challenge to everything the Zephyrians understood about military conflict. They had evolved to fight organized enemies who followed predictable patterns of behavior. Humans refused to be organized or predictable, turning every engagement into a nightmare of uncertainty and terror. Barnes continued documenting the campaign with growing unease. The effectiveness of human methods was undeniable, but their implications were disturbing even to someone from Earth's military establishment. Humanity was not just winning the war, they were redefining what warfare meant on a galactic scale. "We have shown them that any rule can be broken, any tactic can be countered, and any advantage can be turned into a weakness," Barnes wrote. "The enemy is retreating not because they cannot match our firepower, but because they cannot predict what we will do next. Fear of the unknown has become our most powerful weapon." The Zephyrian Empire was beginning to fragment as individual swarm queens lost faith in the collective consciousness that had guided them to countless victories. For the first time in their history, they were facing an enemy that fought back harder when cornered, became more dangerous when outnumbered, and treated impossible odds as motivation rather than cause for surrender. The war ended not with a great battle but with silence. Across 17 sectors of space, Zephyrian fleets simply stopped fighting. Bioships that had terrorized the galaxy for months began broadcasting surrender signals or fleeing toward the galactic rim. The collective consciousness that had driven their Expansion for centuries was fracturing under the weight of constant defeats and psychological trauma. Admiral Morrison stood on the observation deck of his flagship, watching as another enemy fleet transmitted its surrender. The insectoid vessels hung motionless in space, their organic hulls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that human translators identified as distress signals. It was a sight that no galactic species had ever witnessed before. Commander Park approached with the latest intelligence reports. "Sir, we are receiving surrender transmissions from Zephyrian forces in 12 different systems. Their collective consciousness appears to be experiencing what our xenopsychologists describe as a complete breakdown." Morrison nodded without surprise. The human campaign had been designed to achieve exactly this result. Every tactic, every weapon, every psychological operation had been calculated to overwhelm an enemy that depended on shared mental coordination. The Zephyrians had never faced opponents who could weaponize chaos itself. The victory celebration at Kepler Prime was subdued, despite the magnitude of the achievement. Representatives from dozens of species gathered aboard the massive station to witness the formal end of hostilities. The Zephyrian Empire had agreed to withdraw from all conquered territories and accept permanent restrictions on their military expansion. It was a complete capitulation that few had thought possible just weeks earlier. Ambassador Kethvar stood before the assembled delegates, his crystalline form reflecting the station's lights as he spoke. "The Altarian Republic owes its survival to our human allies. Their intervention saved not just our species but galactic civilization itself." His words carried genuine gratitude, mixed with something that sounded like unease. The Allied commanders who had witnessed human tactics firsthand shared that unease. They had watched their human counterparts deploy weapons and strategies that violated every convention of civilized warfare. The victory had been achieved through methods that no galactic species would have considered acceptable under any circumstances. General Vextara, the Council's chief military strategist, presented her analysis of the human campaign to a closed session of senior delegates. Her report detailed tactics that ranged from brilliant to terrifying, psychological warfare that drove enemy forces to madness, biological weapons that turned the Zephyrians' greatest strength into their fatal weakness. Most disturbing of all, the systematic use of fear as a military tool. The humans did not simply defeat the Zephyrians, the general explained. They broke their collective will to fight by demonstrating that any advantage could be turned into a vulnerability. The enemy retreated not because they lacked the strength to continue, but because they could no longer predict what horrors humanity might unleash next. Chairman Zorthak reviewed the classified reports with growing concern. The humans had proven to be effective allies, but their methods raised questions about their place in galactic society. Dr. Foster's biological weapons program alone contained research that could threaten any species in the galaxy. Captain Wright's deep penetration tactics had shown that no defensive system was truly secure against opponents, willing to break all established rules. The most troubling aspect was how easily the humans had adapted to interspecies warfare. They had studied alien psychology, biology, and technology with the same clinical efficiency they brought to fighting their own species. Their capacity for violence was matched only by their creativity in finding new ways to apply it. Admiral Morrison's final report to Earth Command became required reading at military academies throughout human space, but it remained classified at the highest levels of galactic security. The document outlined not just what had been accomplished, but what could be accomplished if humanity ever chose to turn their methods against former allies. "We have demonstrated that human military doctrine can defeat any conceivable opponent," Morrison wrote. "Our willingness to employ any tactic, accept any casualty level, and break any rule gives us advantages that no civilized species can match. This effectiveness comes with a cost that extends beyond our enemies to our allies." The psychological impact of human tactics had affected more than just the Zephyrians. Allied species that had fought alongside human forces reported widespread unease among their military personnel. Soldiers who had witnessed human methods in action requested transfers to units that had no contact with Earth forces. The humans had proven to be reliable allies, but they had also shown themselves capable of horrors that peaceful civilizations preferred not to contemplate. Chairman Zorthak faced an unprecedented dilemma as the victory celebrations continued around him. The Galactic Council needed effective military protection, but the species most capable of providing that protection was also the most dangerous member of their alliance. The humans had saved galactic civilization while simultaneously demonstrating their capacity to destroy it. The solution came in the form of Directive 847, officially titled the Military Assistance Protocol, but known throughout the galaxy as the Human Warning. The directive established strict conditions under which human military forces could be requested for galactic defense. Any such request required unanimous approval from all council members, and could only be issued when facing threats to the survival of galactic civilization itself. The directive also established monitoring protocols for human military development and restrictions on the deployment of certain weapon types that had proven effective against the Zephyrians. Most importantly, it created a permanent security council, tasked with ensuring that humanity's military capabilities remained directed outward toward external threats, rather than inward toward their galactic neighbors. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes submitted his final historical report as the human fleet prepared to return to Earth. His analysis would become the definitive account of humanity's first major intervention in galactic affairs, but large portions would remain classified for centuries to come. "We asked the humans to help us win a war," Barnes wrote in his conclusion. "We did not realize we were asking them to redefine what war means. They showed us that any enemy can be defeated if you are willing to abandon every principle of civilized combat. The galaxy is safer now, but none of us will ever feel completely secure again." The human fleet departed Kepler Prime as heroes, but they left behind a galaxy that would never view them quite the same way. They had proven themselves to be the most effective military force in known space, but that effectiveness came with an implicit threat that could never be completely forgotten. Ambassador Kethavar filed a personal report that would never see official circulation, but would be quietly shared among senior diplomats for generations. His words captured the complex legacy of humanity's intervention in galactic affairs. The humans saved us from extinction, and for that we will always be grateful. But they also showed us what they are capable of when pushed to fight. We invited guardians to protect our civilization. What we received were apex predators who happened to be on our side. The difference between those two things may determine the future of galactic peace.